This is Tennessee Talks with United States Congressman Tim Burchett.
Hey everybody, Congressman Tim Burchett. Welcome back to another episode of Tennessee Talks. Today I'm joined with my friend Travis Howerton. I got the name right, didn't I, Travis?
You did.
Known you for a while, but people know me their whole life and they've never gotten my name right.
Yep.
Thomas Massey always says he's going to do a fundraiser for me and call it Fish Fillets with Tim Burchett. I was like, well,
nice.
Whatever you want to do, Thomas. That's the way they do it in Kentucky. But anyway, you're a Knoxville native, went to Central High School, go Bobcats. We'd play them in football at Beard, and y'all would always cheat. And we'd somehow squeak out a win most of the time. I remember one time we did terrible in the rain, and it had been a dry spell, and somebody had turned the sprinklers on the field and left it on overnight. But I think we squeaked out 7-0 win that year. But anyway, I'm sure that'll go down in history somewhere.
Well, when I was there, we had Todd Helton, so there wasn't much of anybody beating us back in those days.
No, I know Todd. He's a stud.
Yep.
He's a dual threat, baseball and football. Anyway, you worked at ORNL and Y12, and eventually became co-founder of RegScale, security and compliance software company. I'm going to pull my notes up here. And of course, now we know it's one of the hottest startup techs in the country, which is pretty cool. Give me some on that.
Absolutely.
Your software, who else is used by? The Air Force, DOT, Homeland Security, who else?
Navy, multiple national labs, large financial institutions, and starting to grow into energy sector as well.
Man,
basically anywhere that's big and highly regulated and has nasty compliance challenges with the regulators, we provide an automated solution that can save them money and make their life a little more pleasant.
Well, with Congress, that seems to be an ever-increasing number, I would say.
Yes, sir.
Well, tell me about your career at Oak Ridge and Y12, and did you ever go to Big Ed's Pizza while you were there?
I did go to Big Ed's Pizza. I started at actually Oak Ridge Operations as an intern. Got recruited to come out to Y12, built some of the first enterprise web-based software in the late 90s, early 2000s there.
Right.
Ultimately became the first chief technology officer of the U.S. nuclear weapons program, so they pulled me out of Y12 and took me up to headquarters, and then Jeff Smith convinced me to...
Now, where'd you go to college?
I went to Pellissippi State, then I went to Tusculum University, or Tusculum College, then I went to Boston University to get my master's after that.
Pull back on that one.
Yeah.
That's all right. And what'd you get your master's in?
Computer information systems.
Okay. So do they still have that same program, or do they call it something different?
No, they still have it. It's one of the first, I would say, sort of prestigious online degrees you could get at the time. So it allowed me to work and go to college and get my master's at the same time, which was a good deal for me.
So you stayed here. I guess you stayed at Oak Ridge, and then okay.
Yep.
Well, what led you to start your own business?
Just found everywhere that I'd worked throughout my career that compliance was always the equal and opposite force to transformation. That just the growing regulatory burden just made it hard for companies and organizations to innovate. And so the more regulated more they were falling behind the private sector.
Yeah.
And we saw, if you take a look 10 years from now, everything's going to be cloud-based, ephemeral, AI-driven. And this idea you're going to describe systems with a 500-page Word document or spreadsheet just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so it's costing too much money, it's taking too much time, and we thought machines should attest about their state to other machines in real time. Paperwork updates itself, organizations save a lot of money, you get better security, and it's a win-win. Because my view is regulations are often well-intended. Everybody wants clean air and secure systems, but they have unintended side effects on cost and innovation and other things. So we're trying to bridge that gap where we can.
Cut that down a little bit. I'd say that's where the profitability of your ideas come into play. You know, I serve on a committee, and oddly enough, AI is the focus of that. It's a subcommittee, and Nancy Mace out of the Carolinas, she chairs it, and I remember the first you give an opening statement. You know, you've seen it all on C-SPAN, and it's very riveting, which it's not. But this was actually one of the most interesting committees I've ever served on in my 5 years in Congress, because the AI is just such a, I mean, it's a threat, but we don't really understand just how it's how quickly it's moving. Because she gave her opening statement at the end of it, and she said, This is the first time in the history of Congress that that a speech has been given that was totally derived from AI. I guess she gave the subject, and then the AI wrote the speech, whatever the computer program or what have you. And I've seen the Schwarzenegger movie, and it gain at the point it gains what do they say? It has a it develops its own mind, and where it starts creating and it answers itself, and and to me that's a little hard for me to grasp, being that when I was at the University of Tennessee we were just going off the computer cards. And I wrote a program I remembered on I'm an organic gardener, and whatever plant you're growing, if it was whatever color it was turning, or whatever what organic material you needed to add to the soil, and it was something like that now would be done in an afternoon, but back then it took a whole quarter to write that whole program. And so I just and now it's moving at such an exponential space and time that it's moving so fast, and you're dealing with. Literally, I'm sure if you go in some of those congressional offices, they still have 8-track tape players. So we're trying to develop something. What do you see as the threat of AI and the benefit, I guess? Is the science fiction stuff, is that any, I've heard some very intelligent people say that is our biggest threat. They don't consider debt or China or fentanyl or the border or Ukraine or Russia or anything. They said it's AI.
I'm a former nuclear weapons guy, chief technology officer there.
Right.
And I'm of the view that no technology is inherently good or bad. Nuclear weapons can end the world. They're also the deterrent that keeps from ending the world.
Sure.
And I think AI is a bit of a double-edged sword in the same way.
And I'm glad you said that, because I'm kind of a hawk, but I'm going to move this lamp back. I'm not sure if that's causing the same problems or not. This is. But I'm a hawk, but I've been very vigilant and trying to hold down military expenditures, because I see as the military industrial complex, or I like to call it the industrial war complex, because our business is war, and our business is very good right now, unfortunately. And so I see that threat. And all that, and I see the nukes and the responses that could happen if two computers start talking amongst each other, and it could be a very a mathematical equation kind of thing that could send us into the Stone Age, basically.
You're seeing, I think, the early stages of the beginning of the AI wars, where before you have other countries attacking us, we're trying to defend. It's a cat and mouse game. Increasingly, AI will do the attacks, AI will do the defense, and whoever wins in AI and quantum computing is going to have a huge strategic advantage in the future, which is why I think it's really important that be a democratic country. Right?
I agree. China is always our threat, and there's an episode of Star Wars, the original Star Wars, Spock and Captain Kirk, when they were cool, and Lieutenant Uhura. And I remember there was an episode where they went to this planet, and people were there's a war going on, and people were to report because they had been killed in the war, and they hadn't, but the computer system, and it kept the balance between the two superpowers, and people would die because they literally commit suicide, and to me it was I thought it was a foreshadowing of really where the AI could go if we're not careful and if we don't address it, and that's sort of what bothers me about the cognizant ability of some of our Congress people to address this issue, because they're just, they laugh at it. They say this is just science fiction, and it's today's science fiction's tomorrow's, super weapon.
Well, I think you're in an area in East Tennessee that I think is well positioned to think about that problem, because they're used to dealing with nuclear consequence. End of the world, how do you provide checks and balances, high assurance systems where you don't make mistakes? So I think there's a lot of people in this area that are starting to think about that problem and where we can help, and what does a framework for safe AI look like, and what are those checks and balances. But nuclear expertise and thinking about high high hazard, high consequence operations like that is a area expertise this area has that may be able to contribute nationally to helping solve that problem.
All right. Well, let me backtrack a little bit on. I'd like to talk a little bit about business here in East Tennessee. What was your experience in starting a business here in East Tennessee? Was it just pretty much you getting out there and getting with it, or did you go to some group and then a think tank help you develop your process? But it sounds kind of like you were the think tank. So
yeah, it was. I'm a man of faith. I think there's a whole bunch of things that had to happen in the right order for me
Sure.
and for RegScale to end up where we did. The first one is Bechtel was really good to me. I got to help lead the merger of Y12 Pantex. The consequence of that is I got promoted and I was basically traveling all the time, and my wife said, please stop doing that. And then my kids also said, please stop doing that.
How many kids you got?
So two girls, 13 and 15.
Three girls in the home, huh?
Yep.
We need to compare notes. I've got two, wife and daughter. It works pretty good for me.
It does, and they're wonderful. But if my wife had never pushed me, I never would have done it. I'm a fiscally conservative guy. I would have just kept working and paying the bills and doing what I need to do to take care of the family. But she's like, you should go do what you want to do. And so my wife pushed me to do it. And then
my wife says the same dadgum thing every time I come up with a new invention or something. She says, honey, go out there and do it.
Yep.
And I'm like, all right. And then she says, what's all this stuff in the barn? I say, man, that's my invention.
Yep. So it helps to have someone you love believe in you and push you. And so I thank my wife greatly for that. And then
how old are your kids?
13 and 15, two girls out at Concord Christian.
Great school.
Yep, wonderful. It was a good experience. So then my fellow co-founder Anil, we both worked in nuclear. We'd been talking about this
nuclear
problem.
Or nuclear?
The nuclear space. He came out of Los Alamos.
I'm just saying That's,
You gotta eat through my East Tennessee accent there.
Yeah, I got you, brother. We're good. Yeah. We're good.
But he'd been wanting to do this for a while. Very entrepreneurial guy. So he's more the sales-oriented founder.
Now, why would you do that here instead of maybe going to Silicon Valley? Or Silicon Valley, as the case may be.
Yeah. So I'm a big believer there's nothing they're doing in Silicon Valley that we can't do better in Hardin Valley.
I dig that.
And so if you look at sort of the San Francisco...
And the cost of living.
Well, it's really expensive. It's not capital efficient. It's not really regulatory friendly to a business to be out there.
No.
And tech business models in that area are suffering because they don't know how to make money, and there's... ours is just more traditional enterprise software. We know a problem, we know how to sell it, we know how to generate a return on it. We were fortunate to work with a venture capital firm, so we closed a $20 million Series A based off some of our early traction. But we found an investor that post-COVID, their thesis was you should be able to innovate from anywhere.
20 million.
And they liked Southern companies.
Walk me a little bit through that. Basically, I'm fascinated by that. That you're able to raise that kind of money. Is it locally? Do you put a report together? Obviously, and I by accident. I remember one time I walked in on a local company, ended up going bust. I walked in on their sales pitch, and it was like a used car salesman up there with a laser pointer pointing out stuff, and then all these people were writing their checks, and I turned around and walked out, obviously, but anyway, go through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start by saying we did everything completely wrong to start.
Good answer.
If you can think of the dumbest way to raise capital and come up with something, we could probably top that. So we did a sort of an embarrassing round of not knowing what we were doing. But we found a VC, a Squadra out of Baltimore, Guy Filippelli.
Venture capital.
And so we ended up
not use initials in my office.
Yes, gotcha. So we ended up not doing the deal with them, but the head of that fund spent a lot of time with us and taught us how the game worked. And we're engineers, so once you understand that part, you can start to play it. And so we ended up raising $1.5 million in a friends and family round. A lot of people I've been close to over the years, Sean Williams, Bonnie Carroll, and others believed in us, helped us get started. And then the goal of raising that money was to put a business model around it. How much does it cost to get a customer?
Put a business what around it?
A business model.
Model,
so,
okay.
You know,
Yeah,
and it's simple things like how much does it cost to get a customer? How many customers could there be? What's the average deal size? How long can you retain them? And you can pretty quickly lay out a projection of if we hired this many more salespeople and this many more engineers, we could turn this kind of profit. And so what you see on TV about how venture capital works is not how it works. They aren't these crazy high-risk people that just fund the craziest ideas. It starts with convince me that you're not going to lose all my money.
Unless you're a bank in California.
That was another sordid tale for us. We were impacted by that. And then it starts with convince us you're the right team to do it. Like what secret sauce do you bring? And then convince us that there's a $1 billion opportunity, right? There's something big here. It's unlikely you'll get there, but there has to at least be a path to it, right?
It's got to be a good feeling though when you walk in and you say, I want this amount of money, I'm asking, and then they write you a check for more.
Yep.
Because they believe in you, maybe they don't understand the program, but they believe in you, and that's pretty cool. You know, I always talk about Enzo Ferrari. He's a terrible human being probably. He had a wife and then he had a mistress and a kid on the side, and, you know, had 2 families, but he built a great car. Allegedly. He built a V12 engines, what he built, and then he used some Scale and Getty or Pininfarina or somebody else built those cool bodies, which you would say is a Ferrari, and or Bertone, any of them. And what he did was he'd let everybody else go out and wreck their cars the first year, and you mess up the disc brakes, the fuel injection, and then he would seize upon their failure, and then he would never make the mistake that they did. And so it sounds like you've kind of picked it up along the way.
I tell my wife I get incrementally less stupid every day. And so a lot of it is just testing theories in the market.
Does she and your daughter still correct you?
My daughters aren't too bad. My wife does enjoy being right, and she has the benefit of usually being right. So
my daughter's really good with the computers and the phones. I just don't know what's going on. I just hand it and say, fix it, Isabel. And the next thing I know, there's a picture of her horse as my screensaver or something, and I don't know how to get it off. I don't know how it got there, but I dig that. Why'd you want to start RegScale in the first place? Is it RegScale or RegScale? It's
RegScale, so think about solving regulatory problems at scale.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, I got you.
2 things is, one is I think it's an exciting computer science problem. And so if you look at the long pole in the tent today, you can spin up things in the cloud in minutes. DevOps has made everything as code, can go fast. The last long pole in the tent is the regulation side. And so trying to get through the compliance wickets just makes it really hard and really expensive on banks and utilities and government agencies to do anything with any kind of speed.
Right.
So it's a real problem. And so we kind of looked at it, and if you look at how it's done, you couldn't design a more inefficient way to get a worse outcome than how this system's been designed. And it's getting worse as a function of time as cloud systems come on board.
Is that just a pride in federal government that they do that? And do you think Congress can fix it?
It's a disconnect between the speed at which technology moves and the speed at which legislation moves.
Well,
right? And one's light speed and one's geologic time, right?
Glaciers are sprinting compared to us.
Exactly. And so that's where you see it breaking. So you're taking these systems that are highly dynamic and you're trying to describe them in a static Word document that's out of date the minute you wrote it. It's 500 or 600 pages. You're paying one of the big 4 companies to come in, so they're super expensive. They're out of date the moment you write them. You don't actually know that anything in there is what's actually running.
Right.
So you're not really getting much of the outcome you want at enormous expense. And so for us, the innovation was just, it's a big problem. So there's sort of 2 ways, we saw as a business model. Either you find rich people and you find a way to make them richer, so you just can increase somebody's revenue and they'll pay you for it.
Right.
Or you find an incredibly painful thing and you find a way to make it less painful and cheaper.
You ever take on any charity cases? You ever take on any charity cases, maybe a smaller business that's having that problem, and you can you can help solve it for.
It's actually a great point. We put out our community edition, which is completely free. It's targeted to that small to mid-sized company. So
Right.
they don't really have enough money to pay you, so we just give it away for free.
Right.
And
so eventually eventually if they do make it, you're going to be, hey, I'll be calling Travis back. And I think it's a good business model, and it's a good thing. I suspect Congress probably needs to stay out of the way as much as possible at this stage, try to get in, and I think we might just mess it up.
Yeah, and I think they've got to rethink the risk management framework and the authority to operate.
Right.
Everything keeps piling on because the cyber risk goes up, and so let's pile on more regulations, more executive orders.
Yeah.
And you just get to where you're under nonstop audit, you're creating paper, and you're not doing the thing that the agency's supposed to be doing because this is all you're doing. So there's better approaches to that, technology approaches, than necessarily paper-based approaches.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to get you to D.C., I would think, at some point to testify before this subcommittee, because they need to hear this kind of thing, because a lot of the things we're getting are government generated and people that have created the problem. My daddy used to say the problem with education, he's a longtime dean at UT, the problem with education is they always bring in the dadgum people to fix it who created the problem. Yeah. And all they're going to do is cover their rumps. Yep. and not fix the problem and just create more for themselves. So that would be a good thing.
But we've talked to some of those big accounting firms, the SI firms, and tried to get them interested in what we do, but they never will be, because they're the ones that are selling all the bodies.
Yeah, why do they want to?
They have no interest in an automation solution that makes it cheaper for the government to get better outcomes.
I was a shop major at UT. It's called Technological Adult Education. They didn't like me calling it shop, but it was shop. And I remember one professor had he talked about it in his class that they made his college project, final project was this coal clinker. It was you had to make it certain, it had to be machined and all this stuff, and had wood and metal and everything, but it was used to pull clinkers out of old coal furnaces. Now what the heck's a clinker? Nobody knows. They haven't needed one in 50 years or something. And so it's but they were still making them, and because that's the way we've always done it, and that is federal government to a T right there. Well, here's the part that my guests usually like the most and that I hate the most, and I can edit it out, so if you say something ugly about me, I'll just pull it out. But you can ask me anything you want, Travis.
Okay. I think, what do you see as an area where Congress can help improve cybersecurity while lowering cost, and to help get the wheels turning there? I know we kind of spent a few seconds kind of bashing the way things have always been, but to give Congress credit, the FedRAMP legislation was an incredibly good thing.
Correct.
This idea of reusing authorizations, not having every agency independently doing it, was a huge leap forward. We help automate and make FedRAMP even cheaper. What are the other areas you see as target-rich environments for how you might attack that space?
I think before we get too far ahead of ourselves in it, and get people like yourself at the table, because the problem solvers is what we need, so that one will fix some of the problems which might be minor at this stage that could compound into something bigger, and to get us ahead of it so we won't make a big mistake in the future, because I can see that becoming a huge problem with the AI and everything else that we're dealing with right now, because it's so complex and it's moving so fast that what we can grasp as congressional members is a very small, minute amount compared to where it's really heading, and that's why I was surprised to be on this committee. They said they needed somebody with I guess, I don't know, they call it common sense. I don't know what they call it, but East Tennessee horse sense, I think is what somebody said. But and so I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to get people like yourself at the table ahead of it, and we got to get these government bureaucrats out of the dadgum way.
Well, I'm happy to help and serve any way I can. The other one that often comes up, it's less related to our company, but it's one of my great frustrations as a citizen, is you'll have folks who argue that climate change isn't real, and then you'll have folks who want to spend $1 bazillion on something that doesn't help the situation at all.
Yeah. I think you'll find when they want to spend that $1 bazillion, it's usually something in their district.
Exactly.
Because members of Congress, trust me, they do not have the financial knowledge to make 86% return on stock investments year in and year out. And that's on both sides of the aisle, brother.
Yep.
I mean, when we're ordering missile defense systems for other countries, and then we have to deplete our missile defense system to do it, and the rules state that we have to have our missile defense at a certain level, that means that we're not just giving away missiles, we are having to duplicate that again, and them having ownership in those stocks, to me, is a very frightening proposition. And I think that's just across the board. Any kind of research, I remembered I voted against, I made national news and ticked a lot of people off because we had they were talking about studying lobsters in 3 different districts, and it just happened to be in 3 different areas that leadership that was in. And I said, if you want to study lobsters, go down to Red Lobster, and you can do it for $12.99, which it's up now, of course, because of supply chain issues. But but my point was just that it's a complete duplication, and that's what we do best in government, which is bad for the people. So anyway, I guess we better close it up here, brother. Travis, thanks again for joining me today.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
These things just keep getting better and better. It's great to see how your business is thriving here in East Tennessee, and we're hopefully helping some companies to succeed.
Absolutely.
People like yourself are helping other companies to succeed, and it's a pleasure having you here. And I appreciate you being a man of faith, and I appreciate everybody listening to us. This is another episode of Tennessee Talks. I'm Congressman Tim Burchett, and thank y'all so much for watching us today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Tennessee Talks. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Keep up with Congressman Burchett by following Rep. Tim Burchett on Twitter and Instagram, and Congressman Tim Burchett on Facebook and YouTube.